Hey everybody, this is Adam Swift here with David Julian, who is the worship pastor at Grace Community Church on Peach Bottom Road in Willow Street, Pennsylvania. And he has been the worship pastor there since July 1st of 2012, so he is just about to enter into his third year here at the church. And he's a great friend of mine and a great family. He has a wife, Jessica, and two twins, a boy and a girl at home. So worship leader, husband, and father. I wanted to get him in and ask him some questions about what's going on in his ministry with worship at the church. And so Dave, hello.
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 How you doing?
Good. First question. What was the state of the worship ministry when you first got to Grace Community?
I don't think anyone would disagree that it needed a little bit of organizational oversight. Really, it was remarkably well cared for with the staff's administrative oversight. I inherited really a smooth vessel. It just needed someone to turn the wheel and guide the ship. I was really amazed at how excited and talented the people in the ministry were when I stepped into place. There was a really large volunteer base to begin with, and when I began there were about 40 people involved throughout any 1 month, and it's different now for sure, but it was really a good skeleton of a program that I got to put some flesh to.
Cool. What were some of the things that you knew right away instinctively that you were going to change pretty fast when you came in?
Well, most of the changes that I jumped into first thing and really continue to focus my time on now relate to personal relationships with the people who are there. Obviously, I inherited a large number of people that I didn't know, and before I could really try and steer them in a direction, I had to get to know them. I had to minister with them and minister alongside of them and minister to them and their families. So I really focused initially on developing young leaders for the youth worship band, developing song leaders for our then new traditional service, casting streamlined vision for tech engineer ministries, really working with all the different musicians and engineers for the different facets of the music and arts ministry. And then, of course, implementing new instrumentalists into the mix as they came. Since then, we've continued changing some less relational things like staging and lighting and sound equipment. But my first focus, and really what continues to be the primary, is bringing an interpersonal balance and organization along all of the people in the music and arts ministry.
Interesting. One of the things that you said was developing young worship leaders. How important is it to be engaging the younger generation in your church to enter into ministry, especially thinking about in your area of worship ministry?
Oh man, it's critical. Those who are familiar with the worship wars that began in the 60s, 70s, 80s, everybody thinks they began in their era, but the worship wars have been going on forever, and the people who are in what people are calling traditional services these days, if they're 80, they were 40 in the 70s and 80s when the worship wars were what we see them as beginning. And so the young people today are going to continue to move things forward in the area of musical and artistic expression, and if we don't encourage them and walk alongside of them as they grow, who's going to? Schools these days are eliminating their arts programs, they're eliminating their music, and even some schools are eliminating English programs now, which help with writing and composing, and it's disgraceful almost. And so I see such a high value on impacting the next generation in the area of music and arts.
Awesome. So there's a big difference between your church and my church on a Sunday morning. If you would end up going to our 10:30 service, which is the service where I lead here at Grace Church at Willow Valley, you'd see maybe 8 people, maybe sometimes less, on the stage on the worship team. And then you go to your church and you've got upwards of like 20 people, which I think is unique for any church. I know a lot of the even the bigger churches that I've gone to here in Lancaster, they've got like 5 people on stage, and so that's drastically more than most churches to have 20 people on the stage. So how did you multiply the ministry to get that many people on the stage on any given Sunday?
Oh man, I would lean towards a really cliche answer here, but really, as silly as it sounds, I didn't multiply the ministry at all. God did, and He continues to. And it started by using those over me, the people who put me in this position. I think the leadership of the church saw a need for spiritual oversight of a ministry and filled it. I feel lucky that they filled it with me. Whenever a church develops pastoral oversight around a major ministry, it seems that people are going to flock to it. Eventually, then it becomes self-replicating. People come to the ministry, so others want to also. And when we focus on relationships over programs, people appreciate that, and they want to be a part of it. They seem to run to the music and arts ministry right now, but really it's just a reflection of the leadership that I sit under that's directing an entire ministry toward Christ.
So essentially, if the leadership of the church puts emphasis and gives priority to the worship ministry, people will pay attention to that and they will want to get involved.
I would say, yeah, absolutely. And that goes for any ministry.
Right. Any
ministry that is given intentional care and oversight, people are gonna see that it matters, and they're gonna get involved.
Yeah. How do you accommodate that large of a team on a Sunday? And how do you blend? Because I have issues. We have issues blending 6 members on the stage. I can't imagine having 20 people. I mean, that's like having a choir and a band and putting them all on the same stage.
Yeah, it's been interesting. How do we accommodate, and how do we balance that? Really, with a ton of patience and understanding, especially understanding between the musicians and the tech engineers. We are blessed that a lot of our audio guys are musicians also, which is always going to help. But I really believe that it comes from having the right people in the right places. Technical arts director who knows what he's doing, people under him who are learning how to execute a professional sound, and really the whole point of all of that side of things, that behind the scenes type of thing, it's to enhance the bridge between the delivery of the gospel and the reception of the people. Think of it like a Wi-Fi router for God. When you have the right people in the right place, that communication is going to be a clear signal.
Yeah.
So the balance comes a lot from being able to trust our tech engineers, and working really carefully through rehearsals and preparation.
Good. Do you ever find yourself telling instrumentalists no when they go off on a solo, or maybe even just telling them not to play in a particular area?
I used to. That's a really interesting question, because I used to. But I've gotten to the point with the larger numbers that you almost have to approach it like a big band feel, like a freely expressing big band. Like,
yeah.
If you have, I know you were curious about what types of instruments we have up there. Well, right. we have piano and trumpet and saxophone, sometimes accordion, sometimes clarinet and ukulele and mandolin and drums and and then a vocal chorus of 6 or 7. When you have all of those things, it really works better when you give them a skeleton of sheet music and say, this is where we're headed, see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
And 9 times out of 10, that turns out to be much better than following note for note on the sheet. There are times where somebody will say, hey, do you like this better in the upper range or the lower range? And then it gives me great freedom to say, yeah, it kind of sounds better in the upper range. If they're competing like with the bass frequencies or things like that. But yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And how did you get, some people in churches, they think I play the trumpet that is not a worship team instrument, therefore I cannot be on the worship team. How do you sort of change the mindset of the musicians in your church to see that there is freedom for them to use their instrument in the worship ministry?
That's a good question. A lot of communication, whether it's through the bulletin or announcements or the newsletter, and just being open and saying, hey, we want you. We want trumpets. We want saxophones. It's really easy, like you mentioned, some huge churches around here that only have 5 people on stage. Because that is fairly common with large churches, it's easy for people to come into a large church and just assume, well, that's up there on the stage, that's a place for a rock band. It's not a place for an orchestra-focused instrument or brass or, these stringed instruments. And really, I think from what I explained earlier, that's not my philosophy. In music, music in the church is meant to be a time where we're expressing our love for God. And if we only let 3 types of instruments express that love for God as they lead the people, why would we do that? We're doing a disservice to the extent of the creativity that God's given the people in our churches.
Yeah. You and I were blessed to be serving in what I would call medium-sized churches. We're not huge, but we're not small. And our worship ministries are, I think, well, yours I would consider large. I would consider mine medium. But there are some churches, especially here in Lancaster, that just have one worship leader. And he aches for the day where, there's people behind him playing their instrument and more people than just him up there leading in musical worship. What advice, what are some practical ways that you would give to that sort of person, that worship leader with a small worship ministry? What advice would you give him to grow his ministry?
Yeah, the first thing I would say, the most important thing you can do for a church with a smaller worship ministry, really any ministry that seems small in comparison to other churches, is not focus on the size, but embrace it and take to heart what you have and execute it well. Practically speaking, for music ministries, obviously there's things like sheet music with arrangements for different parts. It's kind of a competition sometimes with guitarists. Sheet music versus chord charts, sheet music versus lead sheets, etc. But as you add an instrument here and there, like if you add a violin or if you add just a clarinet, the more often that you can get onto the same page with orchestrated sheet music, the easier it will be to continue growing the number of people you have on stage. LifeWayWorship.com and PraiseCharts.com have become 2 of my favorite websites. They offer orchestrations for pretty much any current popular worship song. And they'll include parts for a wide variety of instruments. They have even a lot of off-the-beaten-path music that's more niche. So they do have their Chris Tomlins and their Hillsongs, but they also have like the Bairds, some Bob Coughlin stuff, Wren Collective, which obviously is those groups are growing, but they're not necessarily a Chris Tomlin. So you can find a good mix and match variety of artists with those sheet music arrangements that can pull the sound together much tighter than a chord chart might be able to. Measures and rests will always beat breath and strum for unity and sound,
right?
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
In my personal opinion.
Right. Cool. So. And then one last to-go question. What worship album in the past few weeks or months has been sort of the go-to worship album for you as you've been playing music for your church?
Actually, if you'd asked me this question 3 months ago, I would not believe you if you told me I was going to answer this way. But Mercy Me's new album, Welcome to the New, is unreal. They have really worked on their sound to be a bit more current. But even more importantly than that, Bart Millard, the lead singer, he shared in an interview about this album is that it's the first time he wrote an album from his heart and not just from his head, where it's easy to write songs about scriptural truth and theological truths and then communicate them, and he did well with that. I mean, I can only imagine that's a lot of scriptural truth and meat to that. But then he comes out with this new album, Welcome to the New, and it's all about his battle against legalism, his battle against trying to be perfect in man's eyes, when God's eyes, God's expectations are always going to be more important than man's. And so that's hit me hard. Some because of my past, my childhood. I grew up in a somewhat legalistic school and church environment. My parents pulled me out of it when they realized they did a good job as parents. Good job, Mom and Dad. But man, that album just is speaking to me in a huge way, and specifically the song Greater talks about just being wrapped up in the grace of God and not focusing on disappointing man, but focusing on pleasing God.
Awesome. Thank you, David, for your time.
Yeah,
this
anytime.
Is Adam Swift with David Julian from Grace Community Church, and this interview is for the Lancaster Worship Leader Songbook. And it's just a opportunity, a community, online community, with a vision to unite the worship leaders who are placed in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So as you explore the page, feel free to post some thoughts on your own worship leading experience and any songs that you might be writing or songs that might be meaningful to your worship ministry at your church that might be helpful for us as we lead for our churches. So we have a heart for worship ministry, and we want to see the worship leaders of Lancaster be able to have a place to communicate. So we hope this is a good way of doing it. Thanks for listening. Bye.